Welcome to the Rocks and Oceans podcast, where you'll learn all about healthy, masculine, and feminine balance. We are your hosts, Jamel Harris and Alex Golden, and we made all the relationship mistakes before, so you don't have to.
Fun, connection, abundance, and a whole lot of sexy time will be your daily reality when you choose to step into an aligned way of seeing yourself. No worries if you feel sad or cynical from heartbreak. That's often the most powerful starting point for transformation. Welcome, and we're about to have a whole lot of fun together.
So, welcome to the podcast, second
Yeah,
episode.
I know.
How have you
So,
been?
way to go. I know.
Right?
Yeah.
So we here.
It's been great. And we've had a lot of fun talking about this, planning it. And last night we had the perfect setup for another podcast episode.
Yes, we did. Last night we were talking about holding space for the feminine, and so
That's not how we started.
no, that's not how we started, but that's what we talked about. That was the topic that we came up with today is holding space for the feminine. And if you want to kind of share what was going on last night, I can kind of piggyback on it.
Yeah, for sure. So like we said in the first episode, we want to make this really, really like authentic to us and make it very much based in real life. So it was gonna be things that kind of organically came up in our life that we used as topics. And so, that's going to be the vibe anyways. But so what happened last night was that we own two businesses, right? You'll get to know us over the time here. We own two main businesses that we work on. We obviously you're listening to a podcast, so we have other projects that we work on as well. And it makes it so that we work around each other often, but not actually with each other most of the day. And so most of our kind of connection time we have to set separately. So we have some in the morning and we have some in the evening. And so all day yesterday, I had kind of been in my business slash like identity mindset shuffle. Like I had been in a place where I was tussling with a concept in spirituality that impacts how I move in the world. Like as in because I teach leadership, because I teach transformation and helping leaders kind of step into that, obviously my life always ends up being the example.
Yeah.
Right. I'm always looking at everything and being like, if it's a problem for me, if I have this experience, it's got to be a problem for somebody else. So it was then with that setup that then I end up having, things that I bump into, like just experiences where the thoughts that I have and the experiences that I have um, are different than the programming that exists usually on the planet on any given subject. So, like leadership or business, like one of the things in business that irks me to end is like the concept of patience, and everyone's like always teaching patience, and business coaches are like, let's cultivate patience and how to be patient. And it's like, man, get patience waiting in the line at the grocery store. Like not for your money. Like I'm not cultivating patience when it comes to my cash flow, right? Like so all of these concepts. And so it was with that setup of I occasionally will come up against to ideas and concepts that like I have heard out in the world, and I know a lot of people have, and I will tussle with them. And spirituality ends up being a big category for that. Like when people bring worldviews to me as a coach and as a leader, and especially as a trainer of coaches, I'm always thinking of like, how is this worldview? How would I coach with this? How, if I was coaching from a masculine standpoint, right? I need to understand what the masculine's thinking in order to coach. And so it's not uncommon for me to try on kind of like spirituality concepts and see like what is my experience with that and all that. And so I had an experience in spirituality where I had essentially been trying on something for size. You and I had been talking about it it had been kind of a long experiment on my part. And it came to a head yesterday where, you've kind of sat with me before where I in walking the path on my own, then started discovering like I cannot reconcile some of these ideas. I cannot get over to hear that is not how I experience spirituality, how I experience God, how I experience universal laws, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like every time this, I promise y'all this is relevant. Every time that happens, it sort of like brings up in me that kind of wounded feminine, like the little girl aspect of me, where I am reconciling having an idea that is common out in the world and then having my own experiences that reject it. It requires me to sit with the like, who am I to bring this concept to the world when I know that a bunch of people aren't necessarily like, the narrative doesn't agree with me.
Right.
So then in doing so, I often have kind of a tumultuous, like I argue with myself in my head about it, because I'm like, what if they're wrong? What if you're the one that's tripping? What if you're the one that's like can't see it for it, right? And so I go round and round. And so it was from that experience yesterday where I was trying to sort of have that fight, but I hadn't realized yet that I was like on my way to rejecting the idea. All I was feeling when we first started talking about stuff, when we were kind of got to our connection time at the end of the day, and that's relevant too, is the fact that I had already been arguing with myself, but I hadn't sort of caught on to the fact that like this idea does not serve me. Like
Mm-hmm.
I can look at things the way that people look at things, and if that works for me, awesome. But if it doesn't, now I start to have an experience where like it's gonna bring up the wounding, it's gonna bring up the stuff. And even though I've been doing this for a long time and I've come to the place where like I can feel those uncomfortable feelings and then still step forward and teach and do podcasting and present in our groups and all of that stuff, you live with me, and so you were sort of like getting in the mix of that whole experience for me last night. So I don't even know if I've ever kind of like broken it down for you like that, even how I see it. But for the most part, that's usually those conversations that can be a little bit tumultuous, because I'm already arguing with myself and I'm in conflict with like me versus societal programming.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I'm catching you up to it. So that was kind of how I came to the conversation. And I don't know if you want to tee up like how you got to the kind of what you were thinking or how you felt, but essentially that was kind of my starting point for that conversation of bringing to Jay like a discussion of something where I was like, I just don't know if I see it this way. I just don't know if I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah. And just to take it a little deeper, we were just talking about spirituality and God and
Yeah.
things like that and how that work. And so
Yeah, it was more like the mechanics of how do people see God? How do I see God? How do we have a higher power in the mix when you are someone that is helping the planet, or at least
yeah.
wanting to?
Yeah. And so the conversation was pretty deep, I'd say. And she was just tussling with some things as far as spirituality and God and things like that. And the reason we want to talk about this episode today is because uh, we had a good conversation, but that's something that could have turned into a bad conversation, right?
Well,
Uh,
because you had been working all day,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I had been
You.
working all day. Well, we had both been working all day, and
Mm-hmm.
then we got off, and you were dealing with a challenge. She was dealing with some things that she was thinking about, and um, for me as the masculine, my job is to hold the space, and
Mm-hmm.
so, and what I mean by that is there's things she was saying and things certain feelings she had and emotions she had that I didn't necessarily agree with just because of my childhood upbringing. I was raised in the church. I had a drug problem, meaning I was drugged to church, meaning we went for Sunday school, we went for morning service, we went to the afternoon. So my parents were dragging me to church, right? So
Yeah.
that's a church joke, like you were drugged to church.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in the church a lot. So some of the things we were tussling with back and forth, it was going against my belief system. But the thing we want to talk about on this podcast is masculine and feminine energy. And so in that moment, it wasn't about my belief system, it was about holding that space for you. And so those are some of the things that we don't bring to the podcast. It's just, how do we navigate as far as relationships? Like,
Right.
how do I hold space for my partner when she's dealing with this, and vice versa, right? And so like I said, it was one of those things where if I didn't understand my position as a man, right? Because part of our job is the whole space, and nowadays, to me, the new currency is your presence as a man. I don't think it's making money. Like, you do have to make money, you do have to provide. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is, a lot of women today, they make their own money, right? They can purchase a home on their own, they can buy a car on their own, they can do a lot of things themselves, so they don't necessarily need us for the money per se. Though we do need to provide, but it's more so our presence. Can we hold that space when they're emotional, and not turn that into an argument, and not take that on as me, and just let that be her, and let her have her experience? And so, do you want to add to that?
It's a good point. Like, what is space in general, anyways? Because I think people hear that as like, a cringy like coaching term, and it's oh, whatever. But really, I mean, is to say holding space was the fact that you clocked that my relationship with God was not something that involved you needing to insert yourself into, as in the interpretations that you hold for how you see it were not necessarily relevant in that experience. So then that's what holding space, let's say holding space for business, let's say I'm in my shit with business.
Right.
The way Jay would hold space is allowing me to have my relationship and my experience of business without, now if he goes, well, you being negative about business is making me negative about my business, now that's where it's no longer holding space. It's bringing him into my experience, and essentially I have to accommodate the space for that. So that even though excuse me, it sounds like a kind of a nebulous coaching term, it actually is, I think, to me, a fair point on the argument of this isn't just a masculine or feminine thing, though I think it has classically been talked about more important for the masculine to learn. But in that role is for the feminine. I mean, how many feminines listening to this have had the experience where it's like you're telling a girlfriend about something that happened, and she's like, well, just listen to this, it's so much worse for me. Like, that's not holding space either. So it's not gender specific.
Absolutely.
But the role of presence and masculinity, I think, is separate to that, right? Like, anyone can hold space, but the role of presence and masculinity is still just key to masculinity. But I essentially I knew that it was a touchy subject, as in, it's not one that we have all the answers for, first of all. And there's lots of differences of opinion. And then there was the added layer on your side that was interesting. That was, you had the societal programming, like you used those words. But as we dug into it on the things that sort of like rubbed you the wrong way about it, what was interesting was that it brought up the reality that you don't necessarily see it the classical way either, even though you use the exact same terms that other people do.
Yeah, that's a good point you make. Because although we thought we were saying it differently, we were really saying the same thing.
It was almost like we used the same definition but for different words. So we were arguing about the words at first, and and then we realized, like, oh, that's not even how you define that. It's actually just like we're talking about the same thing. But it still, I mean, I don't know what it felt like for you. It still bugged you that I was saying the words that didn't match your programming, right?
I mean, I don't know how to say it without saying. It's just like, we're building some new stuff, right? And it's not as going as fast as we want to, right? And so we're like asking God, like, where are you at? Just being transparent with you guys. And So sometimes, I mean, if y'all out there, if you listen, if you are with God, great. If you're not, fill in whatever word works
Yeah,
best for you,
universe,
universe,
source,
source, whatever you want
whatever.
to use. So
Hmm.
I just want to throw that out there. But me personally, I believe it's God. So she was saying some things that bumped up against my belief, and the natural tendency is to start arguing about it. Like, no, that's not true, but
Yeah.
that's my belief system. That's not necessarily yours. I mean, just to take our background deeper, she's from Russia and I'm from
Yeah.
America, so
Yeah.
her belief system is totally
I
different
grew up in
than me.
communist Russia.
Yeah,
Like, that's what I heard. And then later I got introduced to religion. But yeah, it's where like I didn't hear the same words. I certainly did not get dragged to church. I mean, my parents didn't feel like going. We didn't go. Like, it
right.
wasn't like it was like a would be nice, but it's not like a do or die kind of thing. So even just the words alone didn't represent that to me, but they mean something
Mm-hmm.
different to you. And there's to me, what I picked up on was like there were triggered feelings of if I say that, what happens next?
Right.
Like in you, I don't know if that's how it felt, but
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was triggered in the conversation, but at the same time, part of a relationship is trying to see it from that other person's viewpoint,
yeah,
right? Is try to understand where they're coming from. So I was more so in that space, just trying to hear what you were saying, understand where you're coming from, and not necessarily judge you. Like, again, I was just wanting to be the space for you to get it out, whatever you were feeling, whatever you said.
mhm.
It's not in that moment for me to agree or disagree. It's just for you to have that space to get your emotions out.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think this is where we can sort of generalize. There's oftentimes I think it's classically more common on the masculine side. Though I think we could probably say that some feminines, as if they fall into the avoidant attachment, probably fall into this, is more of um the lack of, like, sometimes we say things that shut down the conversation
Mm-hmm.
and right, like, and we feel the triggering, and instead of understanding we'll make a general kind of sweeping remark that essentially closes down the convo,
Yeah.
right? And usually the things that people use, and maybe we could like brainstorm a couple just for examples, but like people will be like, "Oh, that's too detailed for me."
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it sounds kind of harmless, but it's really to say too detailed is a judgment, and say it's too detailed for me, the implication is it's probably too detailed for you too,
Yeah.
especially when it's the masculine saying that, because that's the leadership.
Mm-hmm.
If it's too, if it is too detailed, too high level, too deep, right? I think most feminines in that space, when desiring being led, the reason it feels like it closes the conversation because you're saying that's not allowed in my leadership space.
Mm-hmm.
So you being that is inappropriate here to walk the
Right.
path, right? So
Right.
in some ways, I think the way the feminine hears it, it not only shuts it down, but then it says, it opens up a scarier question, which is maybe this man's not for me, right?
Right.
Yeah, like as in, because if you're always too much, too emotional, too deep, too detailed,
Mm-hmm.
too whatever, and those are the judgments that they're, but I mean, they never come across like that. People will be like, "Oh, that's just you overthinking,"
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's like that, I don't overthink like that is a way to really shut it down, because the other person's like, "Well, yeah, I know, and that's my problem. That's how you see me." And now it just kind of, instead of bringing the communication and the connection closer, it just sort of says, "I'm done with this conversation." I
Yeah.
don't know if there's other ones we can think of.
Yeah, I mean, and just to piggyback on your example, that's what starts happening in relationships is like you don't hold the space the first time,
Yeah.
right? And then the second time there's another challenge he or she is having and the other partner doesn't hold the space the second time. You can't see my fingers because we're in the studio, but what starts happening is you start getting further and further and further
Hmm.
away from each other because every time the other partner doesn't hold space, the trust is gone a little bit, right?
Right. Yeah.
She's like again, over time, a guy will say, "Well, you never tell me anything." Well, She used to.
Yeah, right.
But you would
Always.
react crazily, or you would get mad, or you get defensive. And so we have to understand, and the reason this topic is so important is because relationship is about communication. It's about connection. And so if we want to communicate and connect with our partner, we have to be able to listen without being ready to judge or put our beliefs or thoughts in the pot to, you know, dilute the pot, so to speak. If that
Yeah,
makes sense.
definitely. Are there other things like that you feel like shuts down the conversation, especially from like a masculine side?
Yeah, I think a lot of guys, I mean, I can speak for myself. I mean, a lot of times we just don't want to go too deep. I mean, I'm just speaking
Yeah,
for myself. And so the conversation we were having last night, without doing the work that I've done, I never would have did that because it was going
yeah,
on too long. I mean, what's today? Tuesday. It was Monday
yeah,
night football on, so I had
yeah.
been working all day. I wanted to watch the game,
Mm.
but that's where we get into trouble. Like the guys at the game are not in your house, right? And so your partner has this real issue going on, and you like, let me watch the game, let me watch the game. Well, what you're really telling your partner is this game is way more important than this life issue that you're talking about. And again, that's what starts the breakdown of the communication. And once that breaks down, the relationship is not far behind it, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I think that's a good point on bringing situation like one thing that I've heard often from the feminines, people will be like um it shuts it down when it's the focus on how it's not the right time. So like we're having a good day, so you're not supposed to talk about
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah,
We
that's
were
a good
having a
example.
bad day, so now you're dumping on me more.
Yeah.
Like so there's never a good, bad or
Mm-hmm.
indifferent day. Oh, well, today I'm just tired, so I don't want it. Right? It's a sort of like a time-based shutdown of it's always sort of inconvenient to talk about your feelings,
Yeah.
like that kind of thing. So I'm trying to think of any other. I think the flip side, I think, is when someone shuts it down when they're like, "Oh, I never answer right. Like you always have a problem with everything."
Yeah.
Like it's sort of like I think is judgment of them, judgment of the situation, and judgment of yourself. But either way, you're like, "How do I not engage in this?" And I think it comes. There's an important piece of energy there because I think for the feminine, that's where all of those just say I'm for the most part I think the feminine's looking on walking the path with the masculine, right? And so if there's never any time or space or you're too fill in the blank
Yeah.
all the time, I think that's where the pullback happens and the masculine doesn't necessarily understand that,
Yeah.
right? Like because I think from the feminine standpoint, it's an energy thing. If all of me has to fit under the umbrella of you, not the other way around,
Mm-hmm.
then if I'm too much for that, then I'm not welcome.
Right.
The whole thing just sort of, it's not only a breakdown in communication, but it's a breakdown of the energy.
Yeah.
It's too much here,
It's like
so
it's
you're
not an
not in the
acceptance of
right.
you.
Right, yeah, like you can't be here with that
Mm-hmm.
because it's too. That's the definition of this path. If you want to walk with me, is
Yeah.
not that.
How many times have you heard guys say, "Well, I'll come back when you calm down," and I've said that too.
Yeah,
And that's not accepting
yeah,
that energy, right? And so if if she has to be calm every time she's going to talk to you, I don't think that's going to work, right? Because the ocean is going to ocean,
yeah.
right? It doesn't matter. And so we have to learn to be the rock to when the ocean is doing its thing, we can stand strong and be that space that you need.
No, I think everyone can generally agree on the fact that like does the accept the emotion, reject the behavior, I still think pans out because that's where people flip over into accept me no matter how I am, and that's not what this discussion is about. Because for me, and we
That's
even
true.
talked about this like this morning, where you know me well enough to understand my cues. Like
Mm-hmm.
I am a fiery, like Sagittarius, hopped up Russian woman, and I am like always on a 10. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I'm always like, ah, and And so it would be really, really inauthentic for me to tussle and have a hard time with something as big as my relationship with God and not have any changes in my tone of like you wouldn't have got it in a way where I'm like, well, and then I think this, I'm really angry about this, and I'm
Exactly.
frustrated here. But I wasn't being scary either. I wasn't screaming, I wasn't yelling profanities, and I wasn't attacking your character
Mm-hmm.
back. Like, it wasn't that I was like, well, you're not answering this good enough, right? It was me having a hard time with that, and then you talking with me. I may have been like, as in, I think my tone would have been fair enough to say it was argumentative,
Yeah, I
but the
mean, you're upset. You're
difference,
having a moment,
you
so
just didn't.
yeah.
But I mean, I hope, and you can confirm that it was not directed at you.
Right.
And that was the difference that you knew. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't that my emotions couldn't be there. It's just that I wasn't directing the ocean in your general
Mm-hmm.
direction. It
That's
was very
exactly right.
clear that I was this way.
Yeah.
And then we actually even ended up talking about how my voice was, and I was like, I'm not actually upset with you.
Mm-hmm.
Did that
And I didn't
help
take it
when
that way.
I said it,
Yeah.
or are you already not thinking it?
Yeah, and I think part of this comes to knowing your partner, right? Like one of the things we have to do a better job is the masculine is paying more attention to the feminine, right? We know when it's off a little bit, but a lot of times guys just kind of keep going, but it's just stopping and paying attention to your woman like, "Hey, something's wrong. You really need to
Yeah.
have this conversation right now. Like not tomorrow, right now."
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it helped a lot because it was, when all was said and done, the coolest thing was that I was struggling with an idea that I was like, am I right on this? Like, how am I, like, this is what I hear normally, but I also talk to a lot of people that don't see it that way. And like, it's just, all of these things. But when it comes down to it, like, I'm walking with you. And so that leadership, to have like your assistance on that was really, really helpful. And it made such a big difference because it essentially allowed me to put that whole argument down way, way easier.
Yeah.
Right. It was like to have who I consider my leader co-signing on a concept, even if I'm deviating from like the norm,
Mm-hmm.
that changed it for me.
Right.
Right. When we came to the conclusion of, oh crap, you use that other word, but you mean it this way. And that's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what I call this other
Right.
word. Um, that was when I was like, oh my gosh, no, he literally agrees with this concept. This makes us all on the same page, and this whole thing that I've been struggling with can just be put down.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was a good experience to like come to a new understanding of something that I have heard talked about. But once I lived it on myself, I just, it began to justify it. But there's a lot of fear that comes up when you have to own a concept for all of us. And when you're functioning as masculine and feminine, like, if I'm alone, cool, my masculine picks up the slack, but here you can help me so much by just like telling me what you think.
Yeah.
And in doing so, when we identified, like, just all those things went away. Like, I woke up this morning like, oh, okay, we are
Yeah.
good. Like, I don't have to agree with this worldview. I understand how they think, so it makes me a better coach. I can be more insightful. I can have more understanding. Like, as in, I don't have to bring my own tussle to that's holding space for my client. But for my life, I needed to know which way to go, and which way to go was putting it down.
Yeah.
And it was such a great example of masculine leadership. Of, you had to stick with me mentally, like, you wanted to not go as deep, but because you went with me, you got to lead me out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the part that people aren't, it's like they do the fight, but they don't get the benefit, because
Yeah.
it's only down there that you get the benefit. Like, I really couldn't, if you hadn't cut me off and said, like, stop talking about this,
Mm-hmm.
like, you're being crazy or whatever, I would have woken up today, you would have had more days of me crying and stuff.
Absolutely.
1,000%. That's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what happened. And so it's a great example of like, that's what it looks like. And so I think men don't often think that there's a value like that on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think maybe feminines do either. I don't know that I would have said that at the beginning of that conversation. Like, I'm not sure I understood the value that that was going to have. But now I'm like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
That was the difference. That really was like what made it possible for me to move on and like have the understanding.
Yeah, I think something you said is important. It's kind of like fractions, like getting to that common denominator is continuing to talk it out until we get on that common ground and say, okay, okay, I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. You understand what I'm saying. Now we can.
Yeah.
Okay, now we can move forward. Now we're back on the same page, but too often than not, we don't work it out until we get to that common denominator. It
Yeah.
drags over into tomorrow, and then you go to work feeling crazy, and then you come home, it's still going on. And so, again, this podcast is so that we can help the world move forward for us, this masculine and feminine energy.
Yeah.
Because the biggest thing that we see and that we dealt with, I mean, we were married and we got divorced, is communication.
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
you have to communicate until you get to that common denominator. And fellas, it usually sounds something like, "Oh, I'm glad I got that out," or "Oh, I'm glad we got to talk about that." If you hadn't made it to that point, you're not done, right?
Yeah.
And so once she give you the good, whoo, that's good, you good, fellas. But if you hadn't got there yet, you got to hang in there and keep doing them fractions.
Yeah, it really is a good point on. And sometimes you and I have had it where it went longer than either one of us wanted to go.
And it's
Like
uncomfortable.
both of us wanted to be like, "Oh my god, we're done. Maybe we
Yeah.
won't figure it out." But so I mean, so far and it's been years and 5 kids and
Yeah.
families and blending and money and businesses. I mean, there's a lot that we could fight over that we don't, right? But
Mm-hmm.
but I think that's where in doing so, I think that's how you begin to recognize like knowing the person enough. Like you know my coping mechanisms when I'm in an argument, like getting away from myself, and same for you. Where
Mm-hmm.
like last night I'm like, he seems kind of bugged, what would be going on here, right? And that's where I was able to ask myself and in real time be like, am I doing something that is going against his worldview? And then we got to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think so often it's just being like, if I don't look at arguments as a bad thing
Mm-hmm.
and look at them as more like getting to know the person in a real, like the real shit kind of way,
Right.
now then I can be like, well, what is their behavior telling me? Like, where do they get uncomfortable? Because sometimes we have had to account for where like I come from a relationship where it was like as long as I was crying I could make there was no valid points that I had,
Mm-hmm.
so I always had to come like having cried it out
Put together.
before. But that's where all the opportunities for leadership were lost. But and so were the opportunities to know like to support each other through an active struggle didn't often happen. It was
Mm-hmm.
like processing separately and then coming back together. I was just sort of updating him
Yeah,
and vice
absolutely.
versa. I wasn't actually in the tussle per se with him. He would just come up to me, here's what I thought when I journaled or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there, at the end of the day, that's why we feel like we know each other so well, even though we've had less time with each other than our previous partners. Because that I missed all those opportunities. I knew the version of him that was like chilling and doing regular stuff or like having a good time.
Mm-hmm.
But all those, like the real deep stuff that matters, I really, I think back now, we didn't really ever get to that. We just argue about how we argued.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was none of that.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we're seeing in society is we have surface level relationships. They're not deep because we're not having the deep conversations.
Yeah.
We're afraid of the deep conversation. Like we totally disagreed with what we were saying last night,
Yeah.
but we respect each other as people. That I'm not gonna carry, I'm not gonna carry it into today. I can't believe she said that. No, that's just her beliefs. Like
Yeah.
she grew up totally different than me. I grew up totally different than her.
And
so
we ended up agreeing, which was the funniest
that is
part. I mean,
crazy.
how often does that
Yeah.
probably happen in life and we're just arguing about the words?
Yeah, for sure. And
Really?
so, but what happens is, like the example I was giving earlier is, as you have those conversations, you come closer, right? Because what starts happening is the feminine feel like she can trust you now. Like you coming at her, I mean, she's coming at you 100 miles an hour, and you taking it. She's like, oh, okay, he can take this, or screaming and yell, whatever it is. I mean, whatever you do. I mean, we all process emotions differently, but however, the feminine is coming at you, when you can stand strong in that, she's more likely to come back again. But if she comes with her emotions and all the things that she's dealing with, in topics that you don't necessarily agree with, and she don't feel like she can talk to you and be 100% open without you judging or anything like that, I don't know how you're going to have a good relationship. You know what I mean? And so that's one of the things that we I don't know, agreed on when we got together. We were like, we're gonna communicate. Like we don't let things, if once we see one of our energy is off, we are like, hey, what's up, man? Talk to me. No, I'm cool. No, talk to me. What's up? Because the longer you guys are on two different pages, it's easier to be on a different page the next time, and the next time, and the next time. And so what we want to do is we want to get closer and closer and closer and get that intimacy going, and that deep bond and that deep love, which is what I think we all want.
Right. Yeah. And the when the what we've really always experienced here is that the value of arguing is so high. Like as in it actually is so, when you can get to the real stuff, the intimacy is built in the argument itself, but where the benefits really show up, especially, is in sex.
Yeah.
Right? Like the sex keeps getting better and better and better and more like intimate, and the energy is flowing. Like every single time we have a conversation like that, the sex is better.
Yeah.
And it was already great.
I mean, like, I think it's because the trust deepens.
Yeah, like that. I really feel actually like you can hold who I am and you're not like scared of it.
Right.
I think, and that's just from the feminine, like that's what Jay was describing from y'all's point of view. That's how it feels. It just feels like I don't have to hide. Because, I mean, if we're the ocean has a lot of stuff. That's the whole thing, I think, for masculine like leadership and development, is that depending on the ocean that you're shooting for and want to experience, the more the benefits are there, as in she has a good job, she, is educated, she has a good family background, whatever that you're going by, that's your list. A bigger ocean has more variety. Now that makes it fun, like as in your life is probably never really boring, right?
Right.
But hey, I throw a lot of different concepts at you, right? Like one day I'm on God, one day I'm doing this, one day I'm going here, this is family. Like I mean, the ocean is just like, it reaches a lot of depths, and it goes to a lot of different like places in the world. And I think that's where the masculine, the wording, and you used it too, but I think a lot of times men will say, you're coming at me with emotions, even though for us it's very confusing, because we're like, how is it coming at you for me and God? I'm just talking to you.
Right.
But I think it's that feeling of like the unpredictability of the ocean, where really most of us have been programmed with the idea of, oh, that's scary. So that's that feeling of like, you're coming at me.
Right.
And it's like, this don't even have anything to do with you. What is your problem?
Yeah. I think that's a good point that you're making, is like, as the masculine, we have to separate the two. Like, is she really coming at me? No, she's just talking about God and spirituality. This has nothing to do with me.
Right.
Now, where it feels like she's talking to me is when it bumps up against my belief system.
Yeah.
So she's really not talking to me, but my belief system makes it feel like she is. And you have to be able to make that distinction, she's not talking to you. She's talking about a concept. And I think if you can get that down, that's one of the biggest things that us as guys can do is understand that when she's coming to you, she's not necessarily coming at you.
Right. She could be.
Right. Now, some of them do come at you.
Or sometimes if I mean to, I'm going to come at you, right? Like if intentionally, but it's different than finding something. I guess it's kind of like we can use the tuning fork example, right? Like the way triggers work in the mind and the way the physical brain does it is sort of like, if I can see myself and you, I can get offended. If someone comes up to me and says, I hate your straight red hair, I don't feel offended. But if someone says, your curly brown hair with a lot of grays looks bad today, I'm going to be like, ooh, okay, they really took note of my hair. And it does look bad today. I'm much more likely to take it. So it's kind of like, we all hold a set of tuning forks. So you might have your I'm not good enough tuning fork. And then here she comes talking about, these people that always do this, and lo and behold, you do that, right? You have that other, and that's where her implying I don't like those kind of people pings your I'm not good enough tuning fork. But that's just because you will hold it within you. That's where for coaching, for what you do, that's where it comes in. Because I think you do it so easily because you've done all that work.
Yeah. The work is important for sure.
Yeah, you seem to always, well, even if in the moment it still feels like I'm coming at you, for the most part, you're like, "Ooh, I can tell this isn't my trigger thing."
Yeah, I think that comes with doing the work. You know what I mean? Because when you do the work, most of us we're adults acting like kids. Like you're a 8-10-year-old kid. It's just something that we have not processed. And so the thing that we know doing this work is most people, you're getting offended, and it's not that really that person. It's something that you feel on the inside about yourself. It's something that you hadn't processed. Maybe your parents weren't around. Maybe you were bullied growing up. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons. And the minute somebody says something, it goes through that filter.
Yeah.
That's not what they're saying, but that's the filter that you're running through. So it's very, very important to do work on yourself so you can figure out, why am I reacting to my spouse, partner, girlfriend the way I am, right?
Yeah.
Because once you do that work, you can step back and make those observations. But if you don't do the work, you think everybody coming at you. And I can say that because I was there, right? That's how I got to where I am. My she just saying something, and I'm thinking she talking to me, and I'm like, oh my God. And so now I realized that part of it is just listening. Like, you don't have to have an answer. You don't have to have a fix-it reply. Just listen. She's just talking. She's just getting it out. And if she asks you for an answer, or if she asks you your opinion on it, then you can give it. But a lot of times, the ocean is just doing its thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting on that. I was actually thinking about this. This will have to be a different podcast episode. But it's an interesting thing on sometimes I think I'm starting out just venting and I just want to share my feelings. And then sometimes I'll realize, oh, I actually need help.
Mm-hmm.
Like I actually need your leadership
right.
for that. Like last night was a good example. I thought I was just sort of like, because I was still just on the thing. I hadn't even come to the realization that I was ready to put it down.
Mm-hmm.
I was like in my feelings. And it wasn't until we were having the conversation that I even was like, no, I need to know what you think. So I think sometimes, people have long given the advice, like maybe just listen. But I think having lived that out, it's more like allow the variety of the ocean to update.
Mm-hmm.
I think men are often trying to like figure out like what's happening here and then this, and we keep sort of not fitting into that box neatly. I think sometimes it's sort of like if you can listen anew on it was venting and now I'm having the realization like, oh, I got to this coral reef, turns out I need advice. Like we just got there too.
Absolutely.
Like that's the thing. That's where like I didn't know until I knew I was there.
Yeah.
So if you hold me to something that I don't even know, like we're both going to be massively messed up because like if I didn't know, I'm not doing it maliciously, how would I even plan for that?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I
Yeah.
think that's where the listening is great advice because it's not just listening once at the beginning and then checking out while she talks.
Absolutely.
It's more than likely going to be a minute by minute, moment by moment experience.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, sometimes I'll go back and forth. I'm like, oh, I just need to tell about this one really annoying thing that I just thought of that I hadn't said before.
Yeah.
That was the venting part. Don't need any advice on that. And now we're getting back to the conversation.
Yeah. And I know the guys out there, we're simple, so I'm just gonna say it for y'all. We're logical and they're emotional. Meaning when we tell a story, we get to the bottom line. We say, hey man, who won the game last night? The 49ers won. That's it. But the feminine, when she tells a story, she say, "Man, you should have saw Brock Purdy. They had on these gold pants and this red hat. I mean, this red jersey, and it was like 60,000 people at the game. You should have saw this one guy. He had this big old bang bang Niner gang chain on his neck, and he was just yelling and chanting. He had a drum, and this was just the first quarter." And then in the second quarter, it's a whole nother story. In the third quarter is another story. Fourth quarter is a whole nother story. But what I've learned is if you just let her get through that story, you're done. But if you don't let her get through that story,
You're not gonna be
you're
done
never
for a
getting to
minute.
the game.
I would like to at some point
I'm
talk about
kidding.
the whole logical thing because
That's another episode.
I think for we will have to talk about that because I mean I think for so many women are like, how are you being logical when you're thinking my conversation about God is about you?
That's true.
Right, like so I think we have to challenge all of these ideas that we hold about because it's like you're allowed to just be illogically angry about something. You
Just
know what I
plain,
mean?
baby. Just
Right,
plain,
yeah,
like, just give it
exactly.
to the bottom line.
Right. But I think at the same time, that's the whole like, tell the man what you're wanting at any given time. That is actually totally fine. As long as he wants to. I mean, I think a lot of people will throw out the like, communicate and whatever. If someone doesn't want to hear you, there's probably no point in communicating, right? That's not going to be a relationship that works out. But provided that both people are wanting to be there, I think it's just more updating as you go along because sometimes, like, I guess you just don't have to hold space for like men don't have to feel obligated to feel logical. Maybe sometimes you're gonna be like, well, I'm getting triggered. Can I just say that? Yeah, as long as she then says, okay, what do you need? Like we talked about it. Where I
Mm-hmm.
was like, am I saying things or do we need to wrap this up? You were like,
Right.
no, I'm good. This is fine. And we kind of like refocused on the conversation and did it. I think that just allowed us to get through it, no problem.
Yeah, I think another
Standpoint.
thing I was thinking as you were talking um is finding out a good time to have the conversation.
Yeah.
Right? One of
Mm-hmm.
the things that we do a good job of is like, hey, is this a good time to talk? Because sometimes I'm working or you working, and depending on the type of conversation it is or how serious it is, it may take like last night. I don't know, it was 3-4 hours we were talking. I
I
mean,
don't
we're
think it
done
was
work.
that long, but it was
Well, it seemed
probably
like
like
three
two.
hours. Oh, okay.
I'm sure it did to you.
So it seemed like 3 hours, but anyway, so 2 hours, whatever it was. But my point in saying that is, if we can allow you to get that out, it just cuts down on the amount of time that we have to deal with that specific
Mhm.
situation,
Absolutely.
right? And so, um, yeah,
Yeah.
there was something else I was gonna say, but I forgot.
Was it on the topic
Oh, I
of
know what it was. It was like about the time. Like there's
oh
times
yeah.
that you'll come to me and you say, "Hey, baby, I got something I want to talk to you," and I may be like, "Hey, baby, how long is it gonna
Yeah.
take?"
Mhm.
And you like, it may take a while. So I may say, "Hey, I got some work to do. Can we circle back around and talk
Yeah.
about that at night tonight once we're all done with work, once we're on our connection time?" And then it's my job to bring that back up. Say, "Hey, babe, we're off from work.
That's a great call.
What did you want to talk to me about earlier today?" To bring that back up so she knows I heard her, I was listening, and now I'm letting her know I'm here to be that space so you can tell me whatever you want to tell me, and I'm not looking at my phone, I'm not looking at the game. I'm
Hmm.
there for her. So I think it's important to make sure that you clarify is this a good time to have this
Yeah.
conversation, depending on what type of conversation it is.
Absolutely, absolutely. That brings up a couple great points on. For one, there are times where even when it's a game, if I have something that I perceive is important, I've still waited, right? Like, and we've actually had that conversation where sometimes I'm like, this is a thing that I'm thinking about, but I know XYZ, this is, I can't remember, like, there's one, it was just a reason that you really wanted to watch that one or whatever. And I just didn't bring it up. So I think having an awareness of like, first of all, before you ask anybody else this is a good time, you can also ask you, right? Like, do I think this is a good time? And sometimes that's where, if you know your partner's exhausted that day,
Mm-hmm.
really sad, really tired, really whatever, really invested in a thing that they're doing, not every day has to be like a just because I feel like talking about it or have the feelings. We can all wait. And I think same is true for the masculine as well. I think just having the awareness of your partner and being like, let me just wait. And then knowing yourself. I've also attempted, I think I fall into the recovering people pleaser kind of vibe. And I think it's easy for me to be like, oh, he's tired today, like, don't say anything, right? But I think one thing I realized is that in asking me, sometimes I found, oh, this can't wait. I will just, my energy will be off tonight and then I'll be off tomorrow until we talk about it. And it's just not worth all that right now based on this topic.
I mean, and there's
So,
times I bring it up. I'm like, babe,
yeah.
are you okay? Like, you need to talk about something. You're like, oh, no. I'm like, no, something's going
Right,
on.
because
Like,
I'll be like, well, now's not a great time. And you let me know, well, I can do this, or no, this is fine. You can just tell me. And then, we kind of get to it. But I think you got to be careful with that one because, again, coping mechanisms, like, it'd be easy for me to be like, oh, well, he's busy. Because, I mean, you're always doing stuff. Like, I
yeah.
could tell myself a story that, oh, he's always busy and not say anything. That wouldn't be true either. So that's like for me to do the work and to say, no, if I'm going to act pissy, well, then it matters to me, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's an emotion I can't just overcome or ignore. So things are going to have to happen. And I think that it's been good for us to find that because in some ways I actually bring things up earlier now than I ever have, like in other relationships. But that's because I think give me the consideration of if it's important, you'll skip something that's not so important to you, and vice versa. And that's right. I think it's a good point on the energy of leadership of bringing it back up because I think I think so often I will hear masculine saying, well, if it's important, then she'll bring it back up.
Yeah.
And I think this gets to a belief that I believe you and I both hold is that since the masculine is leading and setting the tone, that opening up uncomfortable conversations is more appropriate for the masculine if he's aware of it.
Absolutely.
Now, if he's not aware of it, it's still on the feminine to bring it up, but it is honestly, I can say it's a big help to me. On the reason I bring things up more is because I can be like, hey babe, I'm upset about this. Now's not the time to talk about it. Can we circle back around to it? And then you follow up with me. I don't have to be the one to be like, let me start this fight with this man and like all this stuff. Like, I get to be feminine. I share with you, and then you bring it up when you're ready to talk about it, which is usually soon.
Yeah.
Which I appreciate. But like, I don't have to be the one to be like, well, remember how I was pissed recently? Like, I don't know why, but from a feminine perspective, it really makes me feel like I'm parenting.
I agree. I mean, it's our job. If we table the conversation for later, it's our job to bring it back up later, I think.
Do you think that is very, if you want to bring us something and I say it's not time, do you still think it's, if I table it, is it my responsibility or yours?
I think I would still bring it up.
You still
I
bring
would
it
still
up?
say, hey, babe, earlier you said you wanted to talk about something. What's
Or
up with that?
but if you wanted to talk about it and I tabled it, you'd still bring
I
it
mean,
up?
either way, I think we have to respect our partner. I mean, if it's
Yeah.
not a good time, it's not a good time. Because if
Yeah.
they're telling you it's not a good time,
Yeah.
that conversation is probably not going to go well. So
Totally.
whichever party is saying let's
Right.
wait till later. But the important part is making sure that you circle back around and have the conversation
Yeah.
that day if it's applicable, or the next day as soon as possible. Because
Yeah.
the thing about certain conversations is energy.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want that negative energy festering in your relationship over time, because all it does is grows. Because one person over there like, man, I told him I wanted to talk to him, but they ain't even said nothing about it. Like, why aren't
Right.
you bringing it up? Like, you told me you was going to talk later. So over there in that other partner's mind, they're just mulling that over and over and over. And they're like, it's just not a bad deal. And so it is okay to table it in the moment if you have work. Like, I know a lot of times I'm busy. I have a business, and so I'm always on the phone. I'm always getting a text or something. But there's times where I have to take care of that business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the other part of the masculinity is providing. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to take care of that business. But then when I'm done with that business, I circle back around and say, hey, Alex, what is that you wanted to talk about or whatever? But there are cases where it may need to be talked out right there.
Right, because and I think it's a great point, because sometimes people will say things like, "Oh, it's because I'm providing," and it's like, if she's gonna leave you, who are you providing for? Like,
Right.
what's your plan there, right? If it's such a big problem that is a relationship, that's not the priority at that time. It
Mm-hmm.
just isn't, even if it's like important, and we all know making money is important, and like we're all doing it, but that's where sometimes it's okay, but what's the actual, like, what's going to be the thing that messes up my life more, right? Like, as funny as that question sounds, in some ways it's easier to ask that, because then you can be like, ugh, I can tell by their face or their body language or whatever, this is a bad one or a big one or whatever. And
Yeah.
like, I just need to manage this. This isn't going to be a thing that I can just like, sorry, I got a call and whatever. And I think it does feel like a lot of care then to to me, like on the receiving end of
Mm-hmm.
it, when you ask me about something, when you like circle back around, or when you give me space to, like, you're busy but then you know it's important, so you shuffle it. It makes me trust that like, who wants to have a family with someone where if they do that to you and then you think about, like, what if they did that to the kids, like one of the kids needed something and they didn't see the fact that that priority was more important than like a customer,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, that's all that thinking that's going on. And if you have kids, you're already, that's relevant. But if you don't and you're like heading towards having kids with a person, all those behaviors let them know how you'll move in the future. And it works for both genders, so that works. Like, how caring she is, how nurturing she is, I mean, shit, that matters
It
too.
does
But
matter.
if the man never circles around to it, it's like, are you going to raise kids with someone who never goes and talks to the kids about things that need to be circled back around on? Like, that's essentially what you're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has more repercussions on your life than just like how happy are you or how great is your sex. I mean, it actually really comes down to, are you going to be successful doing the things that you want to happen
Mm-hmm.
with that person? Do they have that level of holding space ability that you can run the big businesses, make a shit ton of money, raise really amazing humans? Like, you know, if that's what you're going for, that's kind of the whole point of this discussion. That's what we're all working towards.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's good stuff. So
I know, right?
that's good. So why don't we put a button in it, baby?
Let's do it.
This was a good podcast
Thank you so
episode.
much for joining us. Absolutely. Thanks for listening to the Rocks and Ocean podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend that could use this information. Let's build a happier and healthier world together.
Thank you guys.